The first time the Galactic Empire made contact with humans, no one really thought it would matter. Humans were seen as just another small, primitive species living on a blue planet far at the edge of the galaxy. Most alien civilizations considered them harmless, almost like a curiosity to study before returning to more important matters. But even from that first moment, a few careful observers noticed something unusual. Humans were different. They weren't the strongest, the fastest, or the most technologically advanced. In fact, their initial technology was laughable compared to the sprawling fleets and advanced civilizations of the Empire. Yet what humans lacked in raw power, they more than made up for in curiosity, determination, and adaptability. Every observation seemed to show a species that learned at an astonishing rate. Even the simplest humans could solve problems in ways no one expected. The Empire's first encounter happened near a small human outpost on the edge of their solar system. The aliens were cautious at first, sending a single ship to make contact. The humans were terrified. Their weapons were primitive, and they had never faced a being from another world. Yet instead of panicking, they reacted with a mixture of fear and fascination. They asked questions, observed the aliens closely, and learned quickly how to communicate with them. Within hours, the humans understood concepts that were supposed to take years to teach. Back on the Empire's command center, the scientists were surprised. This was not the behavior of a primitive species. These humans didn't just survive contact, they adapted to it. They were learning, observing, and thinking at a level that no one had expected. Some of the Empire's researchers even began to warn their leaders. They suggested caution, noting that humans were unpredictable and fast learners. They described humans as a species that could change the balance of power in the galaxy if left unchecked. But their warnings were ignored. The Empire was proud and confident. For centuries, they had ruled vast regions of space without any real threat. Why would they fear a species still so young in space exploration? Most leaders laughed at the idea. To them, humans were simply another small species that would eventually be studied, catalogued, and left behind. Even as humans started to explore space, the Empire continued to underestimate them. Humans were slow at first, struggling with space travel, struggling with survival in environments no species had ever endured. But that struggle became their strength. Every failure taught them something new. Every setback forced them to adapt. What other species saw as weakness, humans turned into opportunity. The first human colony ships were fragile and poorly equipped. They lost supplies, faced diseases, and endured equipment failures that would have stopped other civilizations. Yet the humans never gave up. They fixed their ships, built new technology, and learned to thrive where no one expected them to survive. By the time the Empire had begun to notice their expansion, humans were already establishing new colonies in regions thought impossible for them to reach. What made humans even more unusual was their behavior. Unlike many species in the galaxy, humans weren't driven solely by power or conquest. They were curious. They explored not just for resources or strategic advantage, but because they wanted to know. They asked questions, observed cultures, and tried to understand things that others considered unimportant. Even in conflict, humans didn't always act logically. They acted based on their own sense of justice, loyalty, or compassion. To alien scientists, this was baffling. The Empire's reports began to take a more serious tone. Humans were learning fast, building technology that rivaled older civilizations, and thinking in ways that were hard to predict. Observers warned again, insisting that the Council take notice. "Do not underestimate them," they said. "They are not like other species. Their speed of learning is unmatched. Their adaptability is extreme. If left unchecked, they may become a force no one can control." Still, the leaders ignored the warnings. They were confident in their fleets, their weapons, and their control over the galaxy. To them, the humans were like a spark in a vast forest. They might burn a little, but they could never cause serious damage to a galaxy-wide civilization. Back on Earth, humans continued to grow stronger. They didn't know they were being watched. They only knew their own lives, their own struggles, and their own victories. They celebrated small achievements, built communities, and survived disasters that would have wiped out weaker species. Every failure made them smarter, more determined, and more united. It wasn't just technology that made humans remarkable. Their emotions, their courage, and their willingness to act despite fear made them unpredictable. In simulations, the Empire tried to calculate how humans would respond in different situations. Time and again, Humans behaved in ways that no algorithm could predict. They made mistakes, yes, but they learned from them instantly. They turned disadvantages into advantages, problems into opportunities. Some alien observers began to quietly fear humans. They shared stories of entire human settlements that survived catastrophes that should have destroyed them. They described humans working together in ways no other species could imagine. One report even noted that humans seemed to inspire loyalty and courage in one another at extraordinary levels. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving in situations designed to break them. Still, the warnings went unheeded. The Council considered humans a minor threat, if even that. They had bigger problems: wars, rebellions, and diplomatic conflicts across the galaxy. Why focus on a species that had barely begun to explore its own star system? To the Council, the humans were a curiosity at best and annoyance at worst. But the few who paid attention couldn't shake their unease. They noticed how humans grew stronger after every hardship. They noticed how humans could rally together, how they could innovate under pressure, and how they never truly gave up. The reports described humans as a species that learns faster than it is destroyed. And in the quiet corners of the galaxy, a few whispers began to circulate, a warning that had been ignored before. Other civilizations had faced humans and failed to contain them. Those encounters were rare, often forgotten, but the records survived. The warnings were clear. Humans were not ordinary. They were unpredictable, adaptable, and relentless. To underestimate them was dangerous. Yet for now, humans remained unaware of the attention they received. They continued to explore, to innovate, and to survive against all odds. They built colonies, learned new sciences, and slowly began to touch the edges of the galaxy. The Empire watched them, still underestimating their potential, still confident in the old assumptions. But in the quiet halls of observation, some scientists whispered the truth. Humans were not like any species the galaxy had known. They were small, fragile, and ordinary in appearance, yet inside them burned a resilience and intelligence that could not be ignored. If the Council failed to act, if they continued to dismiss the warnings, it could lead to consequences no one had prepared for. And so, the first contact passed quietly. Humans returned to their lives unaware that they were being studied, and unaware that the galaxy had been warned about them. The Empire moved on, confident that everything was under control. But for the few who paid attention, a seed of worry had been planted. Humans were unpredictable, intelligent, and capable of change at a pace the galaxy could not yet understand. And that, they realized, was just the beginning. In the end, it wasn't strength, size, or weapons that made humans remarkable. It was their will to survive, their capacity to learn, and their refusal to be defined by what others expected of them. They were small in the galaxy, but their presence was already shaking assumptions, challenging rules, and making a few careful observers reconsider everything they thought they knew. The first contact was over, but the story had just begun. Humans had stepped into the galaxy quietly, yet in doing so they had already started a journey that would change the course of history forever. Those who dismissed them would eventually regret it. But for now, humans simply lived, learned, and survived, not knowing that the entire galaxy was watching, and that the first warnings had already been whispered into empty halls. Even as humans quietly explored their small corner of the galaxy, the old warnings about them began to resurface. Centuries earlier, other civilizations had encountered humans and underestimated them. Most of those encounters had ended badly for the species that tried to contain them. Some had vanished without a trace, and a few had barely survived to tell the story. These records were old, dusty, and mostly forgotten, but some of the Galactic Empire's historians and scientists had rediscovered them. At first, the warnings seemed like myths or exaggerations. Ancient texts described humans as clever, brave, and relentless. They survived disasters that should have destroyed them, outsmarted predators far larger and stronger than themselves, and even turned their weaknesses into advantages. But most of the Council laughed at these stories. They had never seen humans as a real threat, so they dismissed these warnings as folklore or misinterpretation. Still, the people who studied these ancient records couldn't ignore what they read. One account described a human colony stranded on a frozen planet with no resources. Other species would have abandoned the colony, letting them die. But humans adapted. They built shelters from ice, hunted what little food was available, and discovered ways to survive that no one else could imagine. Within a few years, they had turned the frozen wasteland into a thriving community. Another report told the story of a human fleet caught in a violent storm in deep space. The ships were damaged, resources were low, and many were close to giving up. Yet humans worked together, repaired the vessels, and even rescued other ships that had been stranded nearby. The fleet that should have been destroyed returned home stronger, with more knowledge and experience than before. These examples caused some scientists in the Empire to worry. They quietly tried to warn their superiors. Humans were unpredictable. They were not the weak, simple species the Council assumed them to be. Their strength was not in numbers, technology, or raw power. Their strength was in their ability to learn, adapt, and survive. Every time they failed, they became stronger. Every time they faced danger, they grew wiser. But the warnings were largely ignored. The leaders of the Empire were confident. They had ruled for centuries and faced countless challenges. Why should a small, untested species matter? Humans were far from the political centers of the galaxy. They had no influence, no large armies, and no technology that could rival the greatest fleets. To the Council, they were a minor species, nothing more than a curiosity. Even so, the humans themselves were unaware of how closely they were being watched. They continued their exploration, driven by curiosity and the desire to understand their universe. They built colonies on planets that no one expected them to survive on. They experimented with technologies that seemed impossible at first, but slowly, step by step, they mastered them. Each small success brought them closer to the stars and farther from the limits the galaxy had assumed for them. One human settlement had been established on a desert planet with little water and a harsh climate. Many other species had tried and failed to colonize similar worlds. Yet humans did not give up. They dug deep wells, captured condensation, and even developed ways to recycle water efficiently. They planted crops that survived the harsh sun and learned to live in ways that no one had thought possible. Over time, the colony grew, and what had been considered uninhabitable became a thriving community. This ability to survive in impossible conditions caught the attention of some alien observers. They began to take notes, documenting each achievement. Humans were small and fragile compared to other species, but they were not easily broken. Each challenge seemed to teach them something new. They were not predictable, and that unpredictability was what made them dangerous. As humans spread through nearby star systems, they encountered other species, sometimes peacefully, and sometimes in conflict. In these encounters, humans often surprised everyone. They negotiated with wisdom, fought with courage, and adapted to situations in ways that no other species could. They did not always follow the rules that others expected. They acted based on their judgment, their morals, and their desire to survive. That combination made them unpredictable, and the Empire had little experience dealing with such behavior. Some of the Council members began to feel uneasy. They remembered the old records of vanished civilizations, and they began to see patterns. Humans were small, yes, but they were fast learners. They were weak in many ways, yet they turned those weaknesses into strengths. They were emotional and unpredictable, yet they used that to their advantage. Every warning the ancient species had left behind suddenly seemed real. But the Council was slow to act. They had faced threats before and overcome them. They believed that humans, being new to space, could be contained if needed. The warnings, no matter how serious, were still dismissed. Most leaders could not imagine that a small species like humans could one day challenge the galaxy's balance of power. Meanwhile, humans continued to grow stronger. They built larger ships, developed new technologies, and explored planets that had never been charted. They learned to adapt to any environment, whether it was a frozen wasteland, a desert world, or a toxic planet. They survived storms, disease, and attacks that would have wiped out most other species. And with each success, their confidence grew. What made humans most remarkable, however, was their unpredictability. Other species relied on logic, rules, and experience to survive. Humans used those too, but they were not bound by them. They improvised, experimented, and made decisions based on instinct and morality. That made them difficult to understand, and even harder to control. The few who truly observed humans realized that their progress was not just about technology or numbers. Humans had a way of bringing people together. They inspired cooperation, loyalty, and courage in one another. A small human team could achieve more than larger groups of other species. They were willing to take risks for others, to protect strangers, and to act with bravery even when the odds were against them. Some observers began to fear humans quietly. They shared their concerns in private reports, warning that this species should not be underestimated. They survive because they refuse to give up, one report said. They grow stronger with every failure. They are not ordinary. If ignored, they may change the galaxy in ways we cannot predict. Still, the warnings were mostly ignored. The council believed they understood the humans. They thought they could manage them when the time came. But the reality was very different. Humans were already changing their corner of the galaxy in ways no one noticed. Every new colony, every new technology, every act of cooperation made them more capable. They were small but growing. They were young but wise. They were weak but adaptable. And that adaptability was their most dangerous quality. The Empire had built its power on rules, order, and predictability. Humans operated outside those systems. They survived where others would fail. They succeeded where others expected failure. And with every success, they gained more knowledge, experience, and influence. By the time a few of the council members began to pay real attention, it was already too late to underestimate humans. They were no longer a curiosity. They were a species that could no longer be ignored. The ancient warnings once dismissed as myths were suddenly real. Humans were not just surviving, they were thriving, and nothing in the galaxy had prepared anyone for what was coming next. Humans did not seek power, and they did not crave control. They simply lived, learned, and helped one another survive. That made them unpredictable to the Empire and frightening to those who had faced similar warnings before. They were growing stronger, not through domination, but through resilience, intelligence, and the simple determination to survive. For the few observers who understood, the message was clear. Humans were unlike any other species. They were not bound by old rules or traditions. They were capable of things no one could foresee. And if the Council continued to ignore them, history would show that ignoring humans was one of the greatest mistakes the galaxy had ever made. Yet, the humans themselves remained unaware. They explored new worlds, built new communities, and continued to grow stronger, not knowing that the galaxy had been warned about them. They were just humans, doing what humans had always done: survive, adapt, and reach for the stars. And in that quiet, unnoticed way, humans continued their journey, slowly but surely changing the galaxy around them. The warnings had existed for centuries, but no one had listened. Humans were growing, learning, and thriving, and the galaxy was about to realize, perhaps too late, that they were a force unlike any other. Humans had quietly begun to change the galaxy without even realizing it. Their colonies were no longer just small outposts. They had become thriving communities. Each colony, no matter how small or harsh the environment, had learned to survive, grow, and support one another. They shared knowledge freely, taught one another new skills, and built systems that no other species thought possible. While the Galactic Empire continued to underestimate them, humans were steadily proving that survival, intelligence, and cooperation were far more powerful than raw strength. One of the most striking things about humans was how quickly they learned. Other species took decades or even centuries to adapt to new environments or technologies. Humans seemed to do it almost instinctively. A single human settlement on a newly discovered planet would face hardships that would destroy any other species. Harsh weather, scarce resources, dangerous wildlife, or hostile terrain were all obstacles that humans met not with despair, but with ingenuity. They experimented, failed, adapted, and tried again. What looked like small mistakes at first often became the foundation for incredible discoveries. For instance, a human colony on a swampy planet had initially struggled to grow food. The soil was poor, the water was toxic, and native creatures constantly threatened the settlers. Other species would have abandoned the planet entirely. Humans, however, began experimenting with new types of crops, combining local plants with those from their home world. They created irrigation systems using local water sources after purifying them with simple yet effective techniques. Over time, the colony not only survived but thrived, producing food for other colonies in the system. This success drew the attention of alien observers, who could not understand how such a fragile species could achieve so much with so little. Humans were not just survivors, they were problem solvers. In situations where other species panicked or failed, humans remained calm under pressure. They thought creatively and often in ways that others could not predict. When their spacecraft were damaged during storms in uncharted space, they repaired them using whatever materials were available. When resources ran out on distant colonies, humans found ways to recycle, improvise, and innovate. Each challenge taught them something new, and each success made them more capable. But it wasn't only their intelligence or adaptability that made humans remarkable. It was their willingness to take risks for one another. Humans were loyal, courageous, and often willing to face dangers that others avoided. In situations where other species would act purely in self-interest, humans acted to help one another, even at great personal cost. This made them unpredictable in the eyes of alien observers. They could not be calculated, controlled, or easily defeated because they did not follow the rules that others expected. The Galactic Empire began to notice patterns that were both fascinating and concerning. Humans were small and seemingly weak, yet they accomplished what larger, stronger species often could not. They survived disasters, rebuilt after failures, and adapted faster than anyone had anticipated. Their colonies multiplied and spread at a rate that made the empire uneasy. Some analysts quietly warned that humans might one day pose a serious challenge, not through war or conquest, but through sheer resilience, intelligence, and determination. Despite these warnings, the empire continued to underestimate humans. Leaders were confident that their fleets, armies, and advanced technology made them invincible. They assumed humans were still a minor species, incapable of affecting galactic politics or power. Many believed that humans' unpredictability would eventually lead to their own destruction. If humans survived at all, it would only be by luck. But luck had little to do with human success. Humans were deliberate in their actions, persistent in their efforts, and guided by a strong sense of purpose. They learned from every mistake, grew from every failure, and never gave up no matter how difficult the circumstances. Their colonies became schools of innovation, their explorers became pioneers, and their communities became models of resilience. Alien observers continued to be amazed. One report described a human settlement on a planet with extreme gravity, where every movement was exhausting and even walking could cause injury. Humans adapted by developing new tools, altering their architecture to account for the conditions, and even modifying their daily routines to survive. Within a generation, the settlement was stable, productive, and thriving, something that had been deemed impossible before humans arrived. Another account detailed humans working together to survive a deadly virus that struck one of their colonies. While the disease spread quickly and threatened to wipe out the population, humans did not panic. They studied the virus, experimented with treatments, and organized themselves efficiently to care for the sick and protect the healthy. By the time the epidemic ended, the colony had not only survived but developed medical knowledge that would help other colonies in the future. Through all of this, humans remained unaware of the growing attention from the empire. They were focused on survival, exploration, and helping each other. Their growth was steady and quiet, but its impact on the galaxy was becoming impossible to ignore. They were no longer just a curiosity. They were a species with the potential to influence the balance of power in ways no one had anticipated. Some in the empire began to notice a dangerous pattern. Humans were not aggressive conquerors, but they were incredibly effective problem solvers. They learned faster than anyone expected, adapted more efficiently than anyone predicted, and survived situations that would destroy other species. They were small, young, and seemingly ordinary, yet they were growing stronger with each challenge they faced. This combination of intelligence, adaptability, and resilience made them one of the most remarkable species the galaxy had ever seen. The warning signs became harder to ignore. In one instance, humans were sent as mediators to resolve a conflict between two alien civilizations. What should have been a simple diplomatic mission turned into a test of human ingenuity and courage. They negotiated solutions that others could not imagine, found compromises that were considered impossible, and earned respect from parties that had once been enemies. By the time the mission ended, the humans had not only succeeded but strengthened their position in the galaxy. Observers who had studied humans for decades began to whisper quietly among themselves. They shared stories of colonies that survived the impossible, explorers who returned with knowledge that defied expectations, and humans who thrived in conditions that should have destroyed them. The consensus was clear. Humans were unpredictable, adaptable, and relentless. Any attempt to control or underestimate them was dangerous. And yet the Council still hesitated. They had seen humans survive disasters, innovate under pressure, and unite in ways no other species could. They had been warned multiple times, yet their pride and confidence made them ignore the signs. Many leaders believed that humans were still too young, too inexperienced, and too small to matter. They did not see that human strength lay precisely in those qualities. Humans were not burdened by fear of failure or obsession with tradition. They were willing to take risks that others would never consider. They were willing to experiment, adapt, and learn quickly from mistakes. Their ability to survive the impossible and turn challenges into opportunities made them uniquely dangerous in a galaxy that prized predictability and control. Meanwhile, humans continued their steady rise. Colonies multiplied, ships explored new star systems, and knowledge spread faster than ever before. Humans learned from each other, shared discoveries, and supported one another across vast distances. Their communities became networks of innovation and resilience. What one colony learned was quickly shared with others, allowing humans to grow stronger collectively. The Empire's observers realized that humans were not just surviving, they were thriving. Every failure made them smarter. Every challenge made them stronger. Every obstacle taught them something new. It was not strength, numbers, or technology that made humans remarkable. It was their ability to learn, adapt, and persist. Some observers tried to warn the Council again. "This species is unlike any we have encountered," one report said. "They are small, young, and seemingly weak. Yet they learn faster, adapt more quickly, and survive more reliably than any other species we know. We cannot ignore them any longer." But the Council was still slow to act. Humans were growing, learning, and thriving. But most leaders still saw them as a minor species. They believed that human success was temporary, that eventually they would encounter a challenge they could not overcome. They did not yet understand that humans' greatest strength was their refusal to give up, even when all odds were against them. Humans themselves remained unaware of the growing concern in the Empire. They were focused on exploration, learning, and survival. They built communities, helped one another, and shared knowledge freely. Their growth was quiet but unstoppable. The galaxy had been warned about them, but no one had listened. Humans were small, young, and ordinary in appearance, yet they were quietly becoming something extraordinary. As humans expanded further into space, they continued to face challenges that would have destroyed other species. Harsh climates, dangerous wildlife, and scarce resources tested their survival skills. Space store. As humans spread further into space, they began to encounter situations that no other species would dare to face. Many of these encounters were with hostile environments or unpredictable phenomena, but humans did not retreat. They approached each challenge with curiosity, courage, and determination. Other species often avoided conflict or risk, relying on rules, strategies, and calculations to ensure survival. Humans, on the other hand, were willing to act even when outcomes were uncertain, trusting in their ability to learn, adapt, and persevere. One of the first major events that drew attention from the Galactic Empire was a border conflict in a remote sector of the galaxy. Two older civilizations were on the brink of war, and the humans, recently expanding into that region, were caught in the middle. Other species assumed that humans would be cautious, hiding in their colonies and avoiding involvement. But humans were not like other species. They stepped forward not to fight, but to understand the situation. They began observing, communicating, and mediating between the parties, something no one expected them to do. The humans' approach was both simple and extraordinary. They did not rely solely on diplomacy or power. They listened carefully, learned about the history and culture of the warring civilizations, and worked tirelessly to find solutions that seemed impossible. Humans were patient but determined, never giving up even when talks broke down or frustration grew. Their willingness to adapt to changing circumstances and find new solutions impressed even the most cynical alien observers. Meanwhile, the Galactic Empire was watching closely. They had always underestimated humans, thinking of them as weak, inexperienced, and insignificant. But the humans' actions in this conflict were different. They were not aggressive conquerors, nor were they naive. They acted with a combination of intelligence, courage, and empathy that no one had expected. Observers began to whisper among themselves. Perhaps humans were not just resilient, they were extraordinary. The turning point came when the humans faced direct danger. During the conflict, one of their exploratory fleets was attacked by a more advanced alien force. The fleet was small and underprepared, and the odds of survival seemed slim. Yet humans did not panic. Instead, they assessed the situation, repaired their ships as best as they could, and organized a counter-response that focused on defense, rescue, and clever maneuvering rather than brute force. Their actions were calculated yet flexible. Humans were willing to take risks that others would have considered impossible, but they did so with careful observation and learning from each moment. They rescued stranded ships, helped wounded crew members, and even managed to turn some of the enemy forces away from their colonies without large-scale combat. The Empire watched in astonishment. They had underestimated humans for centuries, and now it was becoming clear that humans could act decisively and successfully in situations that should have destroyed them. What made humans particularly remarkable during this period was their ability to inspire others. Where other species would have acted out of fear, humans acted out of conviction. Their courage and selflessness encouraged loyalty, cooperation, and support from other species involved in the conflict. They did not conquer through fear or domination. They conquered through trust, respect, and the demonstration of capability. Even the warring civilizations began to see humans as a force for balance and fairness. The Empire's analysts began to notice patterns. Humans consistently turned disadvantages into advantages. When they were outnumbered, they relied on strategy, ingenuity, and teamwork. When they lacked technology, they invented or adapted what they had to meet the challenge. When faced with environmental hazards or unknown dangers, they observed carefully, learned quickly, and improvised solutions. No other species in the galaxy had displayed this combination of courage, intelligence, and resilience on such a scale. Despite all these examples, the Council still hesitated. They were proud and confident in their fleets, armies, and political power. They could not fully grasp that human strength did not lie in weapons or raw force, but in qualities that were often dismissed as ordinary: adaptability, creativity, cooperation, and determination. The very traits that humans relied upon made them unpredictable, and unpredictability made others uncomfortable. Meanwhile, humans continued to grow stronger, both in capability and reputation. They built new colonies in regions that were considered too dangerous or inhospitable. They explored new star systems, learned about unknown planets, and established connections with species that had been isolated for centuries. Their growth was quiet but unstoppable, and their influence began to ripple across the galaxy. One of the Empire's most startling realizations came when humans faced a natural disaster on a newly colonized planet. A massive storm had destroyed infrastructure, flooded settlements, and left colonies without resources. Most species would have been overwhelmed, possibly abandoning the planet entirely. Humans, however, quickly organized rescue efforts, repaired damaged structures, and created new systems for survival using what little resources remained. Within months, the planet was not only habitable again, but more productive than before the disaster. The observers who had studied humans for decades were amazed. Humans could fail and still succeed. They could face near-certain destruction and turn it into opportunity. They could take risks, experiment, and learn faster than any other species in the galaxy. And through it all, they maintained their humanity, their sense of morality, loyalty, and courage. No other species combined intelligence, adaptability, and empathy in the way humans did. The turning point in the Empire's perception came during a crisis that no one had expected. A group of humans was trapped in an unstable asteroid field while trying to chart a new trade route. The environment was deadly, with collapsing rock formations and dangerous gravitational currents. Other species would have waited for assistance or abandoned the mission. Humans, however, used teamwork, ingenuity, and precise observation to navigate the hazards. They rescued one another, adapted their ships to survive impacts, and even completed their mission despite the danger. The Empire's Council finally began to realize that humans were not just resilient. They were capable of things no one could have predicted. Humans were not motivated by fear, greed, or ambition. They were motivated by survival, curiosity, and the desire to help one another. They were small, fragile, and seemingly ordinary, yet they were already reshaping the galaxy in ways the Council had failed to understand. Humans' actions began to inspire other species as well. Observers noted that humans had a unique ability to unite groups that had previously been enemies. They negotiated, mediated, and built trust where others failed. Their reputation for fairness, courage, and determination spread quietly but steadily across star systems. Soon, even distant civilizations were seeking contact with humans, hoping to learn from them or gain their assistance. The Council could no longer ignore the humans. They were unpredictable, capable, and growing stronger with every challenge they faced. The warnings that had existed for centuries, stories of vanished civilizations, ancient encounters, and forgotten histories, were finally becoming real. Humans were no longer a curiosity or a minor species. They were a force that demanded attention, and yet humans themselves remained unaware of the full scale of their influence. They continued to explore, to innovate, and to survive, guided by curiosity, cooperation, and courage. They faced danger not for conquest, but because it was part of their nature to challenge the unknown, to learn from it, and to thrive despite it. Their growth was quiet but undeniable. For the first time, the Council had to confront the truth. Humans were extraordinary. They could adapt, survive, and succeed in ways no one had expected. They could inspire loyalty, courage, and cooperation among others. They could overcome challenges that had destroyed entire civilizations, and they were still only beginning to explore the galaxy. The turning point was clear. Humans had proven that survival, intelligence, adaptability, and courage could surpass raw power, size, and technology. They had survived disasters, navigated dangerous environments, and mediated conflicts with wisdom and determination. Their unpredictable nature made them formidable in ways the Council had never considered. By the end of this period, humans were no longer just a species to observe. They were a species to respect, perhaps even fear. Their colonies thrived. Their explorers returned with knowledge that reshaped understanding, and their influence quietly spread across star systems. Humans had not sought power, but their strength, resilience, and determination were making them a central part of the galaxy's future. And in the quiet corners of the galaxy, the whispers of old warnings began to echo louder. Humans were not ordinary. They were unpredictable, capable, and relentless. They had faced challenges that should have destroyed them, and turned those same challenges into opportunities. The Council could no longer ignore them. Humans were proving that a species underestimated for centuries could change the course of the galaxy itself. The galaxy had watched quietly as humans adapted, learned, and grew stronger. The first signs of their true potential were becoming impossible to ignore. The warnings that had been ignored for centuries had finally found their mark. Humans had survived, adapted, and begun to demon. The Galactic Council had finally begun to wake up to the reality of humans. For centuries, they had dismissed warnings, written off old records, and underestimated a species that seemed small, fragile, and unremarkable. But now the evidence was impossible to ignore. Humans were not just surviving, they were thriving. They were not just adapting, they were excelling in situations no other species could endure. And the most alarming part was that humans were unpredictable. Reports streamed in from observers stationed throughout the galaxy. Humans had established colonies on planets that were considered too harsh for any life. They had survived natural disasters, hostile wildlife, and even attacks from alien forces. Entire fleets had been caught in storms and ambushes that should have destroyed them. Yet they emerged victorious, often turning their disadvantages into unexpected advantages. Every success, no matter how small, sent ripples through the empire, forcing analysts to reconsider everything they thought they knew about humans. The Council could no longer dismiss the old warnings. Stories of vanished civilizations, lost colonies, and encounters that had ended in failure suddenly seemed frighteningly relevant. Humans were not just clever, they were relentless. They did not give up, they did not panic, and they did not accept defeat as final. Even when they failed, they learned, adapted, and grew stronger. To the Council, this was not just remarkable. It was dangerous. Humans' influence had begun to spread quietly, almost invisibly. Other species who observed humans working together and overcoming impossible odds began to respect them. Some even sought guidance or cooperation, realizing that humans were capable of achieving what no other species could. The Empire, once confident in its dominance, now faced a species that could unite allies, inspire loyalty, and act decisively under pressure. One of the most striking examples came from a human fleet that had been sent to mediate a conflict between two powerful civilizations. The mission was delicate, requiring diplomacy, strategic thinking, and the ability to survive in a volatile environment. Humans approached the task with a combination of intelligence, courage, and empathy. They listened carefully, adapted to the needs of both sides, and found solutions that seemed impossible. By the end of the mission, the warring parties were not only pacified but grateful to the humans for their guidance. The Empire's analysts were stunned. They had studied humans for decades, trying to predict their behavior, but every attempt failed. Humans did not follow the same patterns as other species. They relied on instinct, adaptability, and cooperation, rather than brute force or rigid logic. Their unpredictability made them difficult to control, and their resilience made them difficult to defeat. For the first time, the Council began to see humans not as a minor species, but as a potential force that could reshape the galaxy. Despite these realizations, the Council still struggled to act. They were confident in their fleets, their weapons, and their systems of control. They believed that humans could be contained if necessary, but the truth was becoming clear. Humans were not a species that could be contained easily. Their strength lay not in technology or numbers, but in their ability to learn, adapt, and survive. And unlike other species, they were willing to take risks, face danger, and act boldly, even when outcomes were uncertain. The humans themselves remained largely unaware of the growing concern. They continued to explore, build colonies, and innovate. They faced danger not for conquest, but because they were curious, determined, and driven by a desire to help one another. Their colonies had become centers of learning, innovation, and cooperation. Knowledge was shared freely, mistakes were corrected quickly, and successes were multiplied through collaboration. Every challenge became a lesson, every failure a stepping stone to greater achievement. One particularly remarkable event involved a human colony caught in a sudden natural disaster. A massive storm had struck, destroying homes, flooding fields, and cutting off access to essential supplies. Other species would have abandoned the colony entirely, accepting the loss. Humans, however, worked together to save one another, repair what they could, and rebuild their community. Within months, the colony was stronger, more resilient, and better prepared for future challenges. Observers from other species could only watch in amazement. Humans' ability to thrive in adversity became one of their defining traits. They did not rely on luck or chance. They relied on observation, learning, and adaptation. They took risks that others avoided and made decisions based on both reason and instinct. Their courage and resourcefulness allowed them to survive where others would fail. And this combination of traits made them more dangerous than any single weapon or fleet in the galaxy. The Council's unease grew with each report. Humans were no longer a curiosity or a minor species. They were a force that could not be ignored. They were spreading influence quietly, uniting allies and demonstrating capabilities that surpassed expectations. The Council realized that humans were capable of actions that could shift the balance of power, not through conquest, but through intelligence, adaptability, and moral courage. Observers within the Empire began to debate how to respond. Some suggested containment, others recommended observation, while a few warned that attempting to control humans could be disastrous. The unpredictability of humans made every strategy risky. No one could anticipate how humans would react, what solutions they would find, or how they would survive the next challenge. This uncertainty created tension within the Council, forcing them to reconsider their assumptions about power, strength, and survival. Meanwhile, humans continued to expand their presence in the galaxy. They built new colonies, explored uncharted systems, and forged connections with other species. Their success was quiet but undeniable. Each new achievement strengthened their reputation and influence, even without humans realizing it. Other civilizations began to admire them, seek their guidance, or even request their assistance. Humans were not dominating others. They were inspiring them. This period marked a turning point in human history. The Council and the Empire finally had to confront the truth. Humans were extraordinary. They were capable of surviving disasters, overcoming challenges, and uniting others. Their success was not accidental. It was the result of intelligence, courage, adaptability, and the refusal to give up. They were a species that could not be predicted, controlled, or underestimated. Reports highlighted yet another human achievement that stunned the Empire. A human exploration team had been trapped in a region of space known for unstable gravitational fields and dangerous debris. Other species would have considered the mission suicidal, Humans, however, worked together to navigate the hazards, repair their ships, and complete their objectives. They not only survived but gained valuable knowledge about the region, knowledge that no other species could have acquired. The Council could no longer ignore the patterns. Humans consistently turned disadvantages into advantages. They survived disasters, adapted to hostile environments, and overcame challenges that should have destroyed them. Their ability to inspire loyalty, cooperation, and courage in others made them even more remarkable. And unlike other species, humans did not seek domination. They acted out of curiosity, moral conviction, and the desire to help one another. Observers began to realize that humans were not just extraordinary, they were dangerous in ways the Council had not anticipated. Their unpredictability, resilience, and intelligence meant that underestimating them could have catastrophic consequences. Every failure taught them something new. Every challenge strengthened them. Every act of courage inspired others to follow. Humans were quietly changing the balance of power in the galaxy. And yet humans themselves remained unaware of the full scale of their impact. They continued to explore, learn, and survive, driven by curiosity, cooperation, and determination. They faced challenges not for conquest, but because it was in their nature to face the unknown. Every success was a lesson, every failure an opportunity, and every risk a chance to grow stronger. The Council finally had to acknowledge a difficult truth. Humans were not a species that could be ignored or underestimated. They were capable, intelligent, adaptable, and courageous. They had survived disasters, resolved conflicts, and inspired loyalty across species. Their unpredictable nature made them formidable. The warnings that had been dismissed for centuries were finally real. Humans were not ordinary, they were extraordinary. By the end of this period, humans had proven themselves to the galaxy. They had faced near impossible odds and emerged stronger. They had united allies, inspired others, and quietly shifted the balance of power. They had not sought control, yet their influence was undeniable. The Council and the Empire had to face a reality they had long ignored. Humans were a force to be respected, admired, and, if necessary, feared. Humans continued their journey, unaware of how much attention they had drawn. They explored new worlds, built thriving communities, and overcame challenges that no other species could. Their resilience, intelligence, and courage had made them a species unlike any other in the galaxy. The warnings that had existed for centuries were finally understood, and the Council realized that ignoring humans had been a mistake that might take generations to fully comprehend. The galaxy was changing quietly, as, by the time humans had spread across several star systems, the Galactic Empire could no longer ignore them. For centuries, warnings about humans had been dismissed as exaggeration or myth. Old records told stories of a species that survived impossible disasters, overcame insurmountable odds, and adapted faster than any other. But now it was no longer a story, it was reality. Humans had quietly grown into a species that could not be overlooked, underestimated, or controlled. Humans themselves did not seek attention. They continued their work as they always had, exploring new planets, building colonies, solving problems, and learning from every challenge. They faced dangers not because they wanted power or recognition, but because they were curious and determined. Their survival was driven by cooperation, intelligence, and a willingness to act when others hesitated. Each success, each discovery, each triumph was a small step, but collectively, these steps had changed the galaxy forever. The first time the Council truly acknowledged humans as a major influence was during a crisis that had no simple solution. A neighboring civilization had threatened to destabilize a series of star systems, and the Empire was unsure how to respond. Other species would have sent fleets to enforce control, but humans offered a different approach. They did not use brute force. Instead, they observed carefully, understood the situation, and intervened with negotiation, strategy, and diplomacy. Their solutions were clever, practical, and unexpected, leaving the Empire both impressed and uneasy. What made humans remarkable in this situation, and in every other, was their ability to act in ways that no algorithm, strategy, or simulation could predict. Other species relied on calculations, probabilities, and history to guide their actions. Humans relied on intelligence, intuition, and adaptability. They improvised when rules failed, learned when plans went wrong, and used their creativity to turn disadvantages into advantages. This made them unpredictable and therefore powerful in a way that others could not fully comprehend. Reports from the field described humans taking on responsibilities that other species avoided. They resolved conflicts, saved colonies in disaster zones, and rebuilt communities that should have been abandoned. Their ability to inspire trust and cooperation in others became legendary. Even species that had once fought humans found themselves allies, drawn by the humans' courage, fairness, and persistence. The Council had no choice but to recognize that humans were different. They were not just resilient, they were transformative. Their influence spread not through fear or domination, but through example. Humans showed that intelligence, courage, cooperation, and persistence could reshape societies, strengthen communities, and solve problems that seemed impossible. The Empire had relied on power, control, and predictability, but humans operated outside those systems, showing that influence could come in unexpected ways. One of the most striking examples came from a human mission in a war-torn sector. Entire planets had been destabilized by conflict, and other species struggled to bring order. Humans approached the problem differently. They listened, understood local cultures, and built solutions that addressed the root causes rather than just the symptoms. They repaired infrastructure, coordinated resources, and trained local populations to manage challenges independently. By the time humans left, the region was stable, productive, and peaceful, something no other species could have achieved so quickly. The Empire's analysts struggled to quantify what humans had accomplished. They could calculate fleet size, technology levels, and resources, but human strength could not be measured in conventional terms. It was not in weapons, numbers, or infrastructure. It was in creativity, adaptability, and resilience. Humans turned failure into learning, scarcity into innovation, and obstacles into opportunities. They acted with courage and compassion, motivating others to rise to the challenge alongside them. This unpredictability unsettled the Council. For centuries, the galaxy had valued order, strategy, and control. Humans defied all of those expectations. They acted according to principles that the Council could not anticipate. They succeeded in situations that should have destroyed them. And they continued to grow, expand, and influence the galaxy without seeking recognition or power. At the same time, humans themselves remained largely unaware of the fear and admiration they inspired. They did not act to dominate or control. They acted because it was in their nature to face challenges, to help others, and to survive. Their growth and influence spread quietly, step by step, mission by mission, colony by colony. Their actions were small individually but enormous collectively. Observers began to notice a pattern. Every time humans faced danger, they adapted. Every time they failed, they learned. Every time they encountered hostility, they found a solution. Other species calculated risk, avoided danger, and relied on rules. Humans acted boldly, and through that boldness, they changed the world around them. Their courage became contagious. Their intelligence became a tool not just for survival, but for transformation. By now, the Council could no longer pretend that humans were a minor species. Their colonies were productive, their explorers skilled, and their influence spreading. Humans had achieved what the Empire had never expected. They had grown from a fragile, seemingly insignificant species into a force that could shape outcomes across multiple star systems. Their strength was quiet, subtle, and unstoppable. The Council's final realization came during a large-scale event that tested the limits of humans' capabilities. A natural disaster of unprecedented scale threatened several colonies simultaneously. Floods, storms, and geological instability put thousands of lives at risk. Other species would have struggled to respond, let alone coordinate relief across multiple planets. Humans, however, acted with speed, intelligence, and cooperation. They organized rescue efforts, built temporary infrastructure, and developed new technology on the fly to mitigate the disaster. By the time the crisis had passed, thousands of lives were saved. Entire colonies had survived and even thrived in the aftermath. Observers who had once doubted humans now called their response extraordinary. They had not only managed the disaster, they had transformed it into an opportunity to strengthen communities, share knowledge, and demonstrate resilience. The Empire had no choice but to admit that humans had achieved something no other species could. This was the moment the Council understood the truth. Humans were extraordinary. Their power did not lie in technology or military strength, but in adaptability, intelligence, courage, and cooperation. They could survive anything, solve problems that others could not, and inspire others to act alongside them. Their influence spread not through fear but through capability and example. Even after centuries of warning, the Council realized that ignoring humans had been a mistake. Humans were no longer a species to dismiss or underestimate. They were a species that could shape the galaxy itself. Their unpredictability, intelligence, and resilience made them impossible to control, yet impossible to ignore. Humans continued to expand, not seeking conquest, but driven by curiosity and determination. They explored unknown worlds, built thriving colonies, and established networks of cooperation across star systems. Their influence was quiet, gradual, and unstoppable. By helping others, they increased their own strength. By learning from challenges, they became wiser. By surviving disasters, they became stronger. And the most remarkable part was that humans themselves remained unaware of the full extent of their influence. They acted naturally, following instincts of survival, curiosity, and cooperation. Their growth, resilience, and innovation were the result of their determination and unity, not ambition or desire for power. Yet in doing so, they changed the galaxy forever. The Council had no choice but to acknowledge that humans were extraordinary. They were capable of things no other species could achieve. They could survive what others could not. They could unite allies where others would fail. They could innovate under pressure, adapt to any situation, and inspire loyalty and courage. Humans had quietly reshaped the balance of the galaxy without seeking recognition or dominance. By the end of this period, humans had proven something remarkable. Strength did not always come from power or numbers. True strength came from intelligence, adaptability, courage, and cooperation. Humans had survived, thrived, and transformed the galaxy in ways no one had anticipated. The warnings of centuries past were finally understood. And the Council realized that humans were not just a species, they were a force capable of changing the galaxy forever. The story of humans became a lesson for all civilizations. They had shown that even a small, underestimated species could achieve greatness through resilience, courage, intelligence, and unity. The galaxy had been warned, yet it took humans' quiet determination and extraordinary abilities to make the message undeniable. Humans continued their journey, exploring, learning, and surviving. They built communities, overcame challenges, and inspired others to rise to their potential. They had not sought power, but their actions had changed the course of the galaxy. They had turned warnings into reality, proving that the smallest, most underestimated species could become a force of lasting influence. In the end, humans were not defined by weapons, fleets, or technology. They were defined by their ability to adapt, the